So I wrote a poem called Free at Last. And by the time it got to me, I read this poem and everybody just started breaking out crying. It was just like poetry is where you tune into like that creative force, right? So I channeled that energy, and that poem became kind of a famous poem in my community. It was published in different, I guess, the newspaper, periodicals, and it also became like the cornerstone of this book of poetry that I later wrote in response to the second milestone.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network on ESPN Richmond 106.1 and Choice 105.3. Welcome to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. You can catch us here each week at 6 a.m. on Thursdays to hear from leaders from our community who are interested in seeing Richmond become the healthiest community in America by 2033. This is a partnership. It takes everybody. So if you want to learn how you can get involved, please visit americashealthiestcity.com to check out our ideas board, submit ideas of your own and comment on others' ideas. And if you represent a nonprofit, a for-profit, an academic institution, or a government agency, and you want to contribute to this cause, learn what it takes to become an ambassador. It is totally free. And we only ask that you put your decisions through the strategic filter that says, how will this make our community healthier? So on today's program, we have Dr. Bhagat, the founder of Drums No Guns Foundation, and just a tremendous leader here in our community. He was recommended to us by Nicole Jones, City Councilwoman from the 9th District, who we interviewed last week. So Dr. Bhagat, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited about this conversation.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I want to start out same way that we do with everybody, and that is, are you a native to Richmond? And if not, what brought you here?
Oh, that's interesting because I just did a talk for Creative Mornings called Native. And that should be coming out sometime this month.
Okay.
And native, in terms of my definition of native, I'd say I'm a native of Richmond because I'm a native of the planet. I was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut, and I moved to Virginia in 1974 to attend Virginia State College at the time, and now it's Virginia State University.
Well, I'm inspired by the work that you're doing and have done. And we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we can go from education to violence prevention to community building and healing. So
okay.
I want to start a little bit on your background, and if you can just give our listeners a sense for what led you to the work that you're doing today, maybe a couple of milestones along the way that were pivotal to shaping the work that you're doing.
Okay, so I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. In West Hills, it was a housing project, kind of like Gilpin Court in Richmond, but it was during the 60s, so it wasn't. It was more of a neighborhood. It was more of a not to say that Gilpin Court is not a neighborhood, but my point is that it was sort of a transition where folks who were maybe returning from the military. They were living in this government housing for upward mobility.
Yeah.
So it's a lot different than the generational poverty that we see in the low-income housing projects in Richmond right now. So I grew up in West Hills. Then my parents bought a house in right near Yale, not too far from Yale, on Winchester Avenue. So right around the corner from Wolsey Hall. So for people who might not know that, Wolsey Hall is a center of Yale where it's a lot of concerts and ceremonies. So we weren't too far from Yale University, but at the same time we were still living in kind of on the margins of Yale University, and living in sort of a middle-income neighborhood, diverse neighborhood. I went to Catholic school and learned a lot about religion and hypocrisy in Catholic school. I went to a predominantly white Catholic school. I lived in a predominantly black neighborhood, so I dealt with the dichotomy, like a lot of paradox of going to an all-white Catholic school and coming to an all-black neighborhood. I was actually expelled from high school in the 10th grade, and I went to public school. And the education that I received in the Catholic school really prepared me for college. While I was in high school, I was really searching for my path, what I wanted to do. And I encountered a lot of deep thought and heavy reading in high school. When I look back at it, I was amazed at the kind of things that I was studying on my own. And so I had a eureka moment. I had like this real insightful moment where I decided that I wanted to study yoga. I wanted to get into yoga, and I wanted to have a relationship, like a master, like a master of yoga disciple relationship. And I planted this seed in the universe, right? And it kind of stemmed from studying anthropology. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Carlos Castaneda. Well, he was an anthropologist from UCLA who was studying shamans in like the Southwest in New Mexico. And so I was reading stuff like that and studying yoga, Eastern religions, and decided that yoga was my path. And I wanted to have that kind of like apprentice relationship. So one day I was walking through the student commons at Virginia State University. I saw this flyer that said, yoga classes. Set something off, started taking the classes. At the time, I didn't know that the person who was teaching the classes, who was a professor in microbiology at Virginia State, would end up being my my spiritual teacher. And this was in '75 that I met him, and I actually just was at his house, on Sunday. So I've been his student for close to 50 years.
Well, I have to say, we spoke before this, and I also lived in New Haven for a brief time. And I don't know if it was my first yoga experience, but certainly my most profound yoga experience at a place called Breathing Room. And, a great name for a yoga studio, and also a space that was actually created that lived up to its name. And it was fantastic. And I haven't found that again. And I'm on a search for that myself.
I can give you some recommendations. And so I would say 2, maybe 3 milestones besides, just that journey. One milestone was Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, 1968. I was in 6th grade. I remember my teacher, Mrs. McDonald's class. We had to learn square dancing. That was funny.
Were you a good dancer?
I think so. I'll say I was a good dancer. And we had to write poetry. And so every Friday, I don't know if it was every Friday, but it was periodic and regular. And so the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated was Poetry Day. So everybody had to come prepared with a poem. And I was not prepared. I did not have my poem ready. And as students were reading their poems, because like you had to be ready to recite your poem on the spot. So as people were going around the room reading their poems, I was like, there's no escape. Like you have to have it ready, right? So I wrote a poem called Free at Last. And by the time it got to me, I read this poem and everybody just started breaking out crying. It was just like poetry is where you tune into like that creative force, right? So I channeled that energy, and that poem became kind of a famous poem in my community. It was published in different, I guess, the newspaper, periodicals, and it also became like the cornerstone of this book of poetry that I later wrote in response to the second milestone that I want to mention, which was when my brother got killed. My brother was younger than me, 3 years younger than me, and he was in the service, the Air Force, and both of us had sort of gone in different directions after high school. I was in grad school. He went to went to the university too. Then he decided to go into the Air Force, and we hadn't seen each other for like 3 years because he was stationed overseas. Then he was stationed in Texas. I was in Louisiana at Tulane University for public health, and we converged in 1981. He was in New Haven, and I was feeling kind of frustrated with grad school, and I was like, I think I'm gonna take a break. So my spirit was really unsettled. My brother and I connected for about 3 weeks. He was in New Haven, and then when he went back to the service, like we just had these plans of reconnecting as like brothers. But after he returned from his leave, we got a call from the Air Force that he was missing. Didn't know what, didn't really know what was going on, but thought that he would turn up until one day in April 1981, a chaplain, an officer from the Air Force came to, by their presence, we knew that it was dire. The news was dire, but they told us that he died from a gunshot wound. And that sort of propelled me into finding a way for healing instead of retaliation.
Mm-hmm. You are listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. Today in the studio we have Dr. Ron Bhagat, community healer and leader, and someone with vast experience across connecting with people and everything from community health to gun violence prevention. So let's talk a little bit about your response there, because it's profound when we lose somebody, and
Mm-hmm.
it shakes us to our core. But you went on and drove forward. So tell us what you did next.
So what I did next is, in the process of healing, I just started writing. So I wrote this book, poetry, called Breast Milk Blues. And it was really addressing a lot of issues like the Atlanta killings, nutrition, or lack of nutrition in the United States, racism. And I used that as a vehicle to bring people together, form a percussion ensemble, and perform the poetry live. We call that ensemble Children of the Sun. And so after, I don't know, maybe after a few months, I decided to move back to Virginia, because I was in New Haven, Connecticut at the time. I had moved from New Orleans to New Haven, Connecticut. I decided to move back to Virginia to be near my teacher. And I sort of put everything aside and kind of went into this inner pilgrimage. One of my friends at the time kept Children of the Sun going. And then eventually we reconnected. And from that reconnection, we started performing at different major events like the Million Mile March, Stand for Children, state capitals. We were really promoting healing through rhythm to address some of the root causes of gun violence. This is when school shootings started to become more prevalent on the American landscape, like Columbine. This is when Columbine happened. And it was just a string of school shootings. So at that point, we had to decide whether we were going to be Children of the Sun or we were going to be Drums No Guns. So we changed the name to Drums No Guns, World Percussion Ensemble. And at that time, I had also started teaching. So I was a science teacher. So I was integrating this work into all of the different schools and working with students and creating sort of this legacy of the work. And about 5 years ago, Drums No Guns, the percussion ensemble, evolved into a foundation to really sustain the legacy of the work. And in addition to getting involved in like trauma healing and restorative practices and mindfulness, and of course the yoga. Mm-hmm. And then also looking at something I call artfulness, the intersection of health and art. How do we use art-based multimedia projects for public health campaigns to awaken awareness and to really address some of the root causes? And one other thing is during that time, I started working in recreation centers and began asking the question. This was probably in the early 90s. How many, to young people, how many of you know somebody that's been shot or killed? And at that point, it was almost like maybe 60%, like 6 out of 10 kids would raise their hand. But now, if you ask that question, it might be 9 out of 10. And if you ask them if they know multiple people, most of the hands still go up.
So tell me about drums. Why drums? What is it about rhythm that brings us together? You know, we were talking earlier about how it seems like people feel alone in the world,
Yeah.
but we're not alone. We're surrounded by other folks. What does drumming and rhythm do for us?
I think what drumming and rhythm does for us is it connects us because, like if you think about the drum that all of us have in our body, it's our heart. And that heart beats from the time of like during embryonic development. That heart starts to beat and it's a constant pulse. It's a constant beat. I saw this National Geographic special one time where it was about the incredible human machine and how the body works. And it was showing like all of these blood cells, each one of them had their own little pulse. But when they got close, they were in close proximity, some kind of chemical was released and they all started kind of pulsating at the same rate, right? And so what I've noticed about drumming through the years is that there's something about how the beat and the rhythm connects us. And I mean, like, even if you can't hear, you can feel the vibration. So it's the oldest and most widespread of all the instruments. It's used in all types of ceremonies like birth, marriage, celebrations, even to honor the dead. And I just feel like it's a language that transcends our differences. It just helps us to connect on deeper levels. And it's a remedy for something I call social arrhythmia, like society's out of balance. Mm-hmm. One of the symptoms or characteristics is disconnection that you brought up. And it's like a lot of people are disconnected and they feel alienated. They feel like, where do I belong? Or they're told that they don't belong. And that develops a mistrust. So those I think drumming addresses disconnection, alienation, and mistrust.
So you have worked with and worked with young people. What do you think is, from their perspective, you know, what's the experience that they're going through? You know, why do they need our focus today?
I mean, like being a teacher for over 30 years, all different types of schools, mostly working with adolescents between the age of like 14 and 18. But now, and I never thought I would be working with a middle school because of my first experience with like substituting in New Haven with middle school students. But I'm working with middle school students at MLK where I'm working on trying to create this national model for mindfulness-based restorative practices. And I think that what they're asking for is someone who cares, someone they can trust, someone who's going to be there, and someone who is going to expose them to something that expands their worldview and something that like relates to their culture, you know. And again, like we just did this concert called Generation Dream. It's actually the Generation Dream 15. We did 14 up until COVID, and so we reactivated it. And so what I find is that they love being challenged. Like they have like they might be kind of stage fright, or they might not want to show their excellence because maybe it's been suppressed, especially like we were talking about the education system earlier. And like that whole banking model where like the teacher is the expert and they're just depositing knowledge into the empty vessel. So we do more of a pedagogy of the oppressed approach, that like Freire, where it's how do you connect with people in a way where it validates their experience in the universe and that you honor it and you're working with them rather than doing things to them or just for them. So I think young people are inspired by the work that comes from the heart. And it just reminds me of this question I ask people: whose shoulders do you stand on? So like how did you get here? How did I get here? Who in our lives are role models, or even more than just role models? Whose shoulders do we stand on? And then I start asking this other question: and who stands on our shoulders? It's the whole idea of 7 generations. And I learned a different way to interpret that, rather than it's like, oh, we're planting trees for 7 generations behind us. That the 7th generation means more or less that we are in the center, and that there are 3 generations that stand on our shoulders, and there's 3 generations whose shoulders we stand on, which makes the impact of the work that we're doing with young people even more relevant, because what I'm doing, what you're doing for them, they can then do for their children, and then their children can do for their children. So it's visible almost. It's a visible cord where we can see that there's going to have an impact on our great-grandchildren.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. We have Dr. Bhagat, the founder of Drums No Guns Foundation. Is Drums Not Guns or Drums No Guns? I want to make sure.
Drums No Guns.
Drums No Guns. Thank you.
It's not guns. It's okay. Drums No Guns. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. So talk about the young person who feels isolated, maybe not connected. What's the appropriate way for folks who care, who want to be that support, to invite that conversation?
I think they probably need to connect with people who work with those young people, right? And definitely leave their like sort of ego missionary mindset at the gate. Come in to be to work with, and not come in with like I have the solutions for. And yeah, like really connect with folks who are doing the work, and who can bring you in as an ally, and then be open to learn, and also try to leave guilt and shame, like I don't know what to say, or I might not be accepted, because the color barriers that we've created, or that have been created in this society, those are artificial barriers. Mm-hmm. Those are like really artificial barriers, especially with young people, because they can see past our surface. We call it sawubona. Sawubona is when you see beyond just the surface. You see beyond just a person's clothes. You see not only their essence, but you see like those that show those who they come from. Like you see their totality. Mm-hmm. And I think young people are very perceptive. They have what do they call? I forget. It's almost like what's the name of it? It's like they have a detector, mm-hmm. where they can detect insincerity, but that's not what they call it. I forget what it's called. But basically, they know if you're for real.
Mm-hmm. That's tough. That's tough. I think sometimes we're trying really hard to show people what we're made of, what we're worth, what we can do. And we try a little bit too much, and that's where the insincerity comes in. So, we asked everybody a couple of questions, and I don't know if I prepared you for this, so I'll ask you one first, and I'll ask you an easier one second.
Okay.
We always ask folks, to give us a sense for, somebody that we should bring into the studio to talk to and learn from.
I was aware of that question.
And then I want to get to some specific ideas that you might be able to share and add to our ideas board.
Okay.
On ways that, you've been in this community for a long time, and you've got a ton of wisdom. What does Richmond need? And what is an idea that anybody could maybe go run with or jump into as a way to restore the health of this community? Yeah.
All right. So for the first question, I don't know if you've had him on yet, but it will really tie into my second answer too. I would invite Duran Chavis.
You're the second person to recommend that he come on this show. Yeah. I have not invited him yet, but I have to.
You should invite Duran Chavis. And let me tell you.
I've had a great conversation with him in the past, so I know I like it.
So this project that I envision is called Massive Resilience. And it's kind of a response to Virginia's doctrine of massive resistance that was embedded into the community after Brown versus Board of Education. By the way, this is the 70th, we're coming on the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And so massive resilience is something that came to me when I was listening to NPR. They were talking about massive resistance, and I was thinking, wow, massive resistance was just like so all-encompassing in the state of Virginia. It's like we need something like that. Like we have people working on trauma. We have people working with restorative justice. We have people working in the community. It's like, what could we do to bring all of these sort of managerial level people, which I call the mitochondria of the work, because they're actually implementing the ideas. What can we do to bring them together? So I think that something that we all need to strive for in Richmond is how to move past our differences and scarcity mindset into a massive resilience mindset where more symbiotic and more of a way to bring our ideas together and operate more from a unified energy field. And so when it comes to like what Duran is doing with green space and urban gardening and agriculture, I look at that as part of something that we're doing, working at the school to MLK, which I mentioned earlier as the national model. So we've reimagined in-school suspension. We've created restorative room rather than in-school suspension. We've integrated mindfulness into the culture of the school. We have a Sankofa mindfulness room. And we also have established a garden, a community garden for cultivating sacred safe space. Where can young people, where can families go? Where can people in the community come to where they feel safe and we can do community healing circles? So it's part of cultivating a thriving ecosystem for youth. And these garden spaces that address ecological issues, that's a key. What Duran is doing is creating these spaces where we can come together and reconnect with ourselves and reconnect with nature, which is a force greater than ourselves. And I've been talking to the Department of Park and Recreations about ways to expand this massive resilience model into recreation centers and also into parks and playgrounds. So I think that we can all collaborate. We can have festivals. We could have, we can join together in this, I call it an arts-based multimedia public health campaign. It's called AMP. We can all get amped together and start to, use technology, use arts, use the land to promote a different way of looking at things that inspire young people to tap into their intuition, their imagination, and motivate them to illuminate their ideas and creativity.
So at Teen Summit a couple of weeks ago, we did bring the ideas board, and one of the young people submitted an idea to eliminate out-of-school suspension. And so I applaud you for working on that problem. And, I think that, this is an invitation that you're extending to the community to believe that we can do this.
Yeah.
And then to do something big to really overcome something that has been big and we're still suffering.
Yeah, like in-school suspension is a direct link to a lot of the issues that repress a lot of issues that young people have, and it exacerbates these issues. And we've done it. Like we've reimagined in-school suspension, and it's like using design thinking to design justice. So we have designed spaces where instead of sending a kid to kind of be like looking at a wall all day,
you're not welcome.
Yeah, you're not welcome, to create a place where, look, what's going on with you? What can we do to support you? How can we get you back in class as soon as possible? Then we got to do stuff in our classrooms too. We got to we have to innovate, and we have to be more creative, and we have to figure out like how to meet the minimum standards of SOLs, but definitely surpass and exceed the SOLs, so that young people feel challenged. They feel like they're not being insulted by this low level material.
So with about 15 seconds left, and then we could go on for another hour, how can people get in touch with you out in the world?
So they can get in touch with me. My website is rombhagat.com, or they can, on Instagram, it's Dr. Ron Bhagat, or Facebook, just look at Ron Bhagat.
Well, I appreciate you for dropping a little bit of those chemistry nuggets on us throughout. Definitely want to get you in to do more of that. But we've got some other important folks to interview, and I appreciate you telling me to bring Duran on. I've enjoyed this conversation. I do wish we had more time to talk, but I'm sure our listeners at home will also appreciate the insights.
Appreciate you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. This is America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. Please join us each week at 6 a.m. on the network. Also catch us on YouTube at America's Healthiest City, as well as Instagram. Follow us to catch clips and full episodes. We'll catch you next time.